perfect party food. Warm, comforting, earthy, savory, a little sweet, fluffy, rich. Tamales! That's the perfect party food. And they'll stay warm and luscious for hours. And you know the best thing about them is that they come individually gift wrapped, so that each guest has the fun of unwrapping a beautiful handmade package. Oh, I just can't get out of my mind when I saw them making tamales at this little place in Puerto Vallarta, Tamaleria Candelaria. They make beautiful handcrafted bundles, totally from scratch. I mean, they even start by boiling the dried corn and then grinding it to make that fresh corn masa. And then they turn that into that perfectly fluffy batter that gets spread on corn husks or banana leaves, filled with all kinds of savory and sweet fillings. Then they're rolled up and steamed until the masa is puffed and tender and perfumed from the leaves and the filling. I mean, there's nothing like that anticipation when you're opening them up. The pleasure of eating them while they're piping hot, right out of the wrapper. Maybe a little salsa to round out the flavor.
Oh, that's tasty.
Now there's something else I didn't mention about why tamales are the ultimate party food. If you play your cards right, they could be more than just the food. They could be the whole party. Now, I won't deny that making tamales has its labor-intensive side. But in Mexico, they seem to have gotten it right. They've figured out that it takes a whole village to make a tamal. Usually right before a big holiday or special event, someone will host a tamalada, a tamal-making party, where everybody gets together and makes tamales. And that party, well, it's just as much about cooking as it is about eating. I've got some friends coming over today, and that's just what I'm going for. I thought I'd make a couple different kinds of corn masa batter, 3 different fillings, and when everybody arrives, we'll be ready to roll. Literally. I thought while the tamales were steaming, we could have some beautiful shrimp soup. And then when the house is so full of that amazing aroma of steaming tamales, we dig into one big tamalathon. Now there are 4 things that define tamales. The first is steam. They're all steamed. That's why I dug out this old-fashioned galvanized Mexican steamer, just to show you the size that these things can go to. The second is the wrapper. And most of us know tamales to be wrapped in corn husks, but of course there's some other options. The third thing, well, it's fillings, and they can range over a wide variety of tastes and textures. And the fourth, well, it's the batter, the corn masa batter. And today I'm going to start with this fresh ground corn masa that I bought from a local tortilla factory. It comes out of the mill just like this, as a sort of damp meal. Now, for most of us, this is going to be a much easier option. This is the dehydrated masa, but you always want to look for the one that says for tamales, para tamales, not the one that's used for making corn tortillas. That one's much, much more finely ground and will produce a different texture in the tamales. Now the second ingredient that goes into the batter is this stuff, manteca de puerco. And I know this is really controversial, but fresh rendered pork lard, I'm not talking about the stuff that you find hydrogenated in cubes on the grocery store shelves, but the fresh rendered stuff that you'll get from a local butcher, or I get this at my local Mexican grocery store here. That's going to give you that wonderfully savory and satisfying flavor. Now, the other option, of course, is vegetable shortening, which we always thought was way healthier for us until recently when we realized that the hydrogenated stuff actually wasn't any healthier than the fresh rendered pork lard. And besides, it doesn't have very much flavor. So if you're going to go that route, look for the healthier, trans-fat-free varieties. Today, I'm going straight traditional. And I'm going to start by measuring out about 1.25 cups of this fresh rendered pork lard and putting it into a mixer bowl. Now to that, I'm going to add a couple of teaspoons of salt and about 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm going to beat that until it's light and fluffy. I'm going to take about 1/3 of this crumbly masa para tamales and add that to the bowl with the beaten lard, salt, and baking powder. And I'm going to add some broth. It's a little bit like making pie crust in the sense that we want to get exactly the right texture out of this. So I'm going to start with about 1/2 cup or so. Beat that until it's completely light and fluffy looking. Add another addition of the corn masa and another addition of broth. I'm going for a light cake batter-like consistency here. And now our final addition of the corn masa and a little bit more broth. Now here's a little trick that I want to show you. In some cold water, I'm going to float a tiny little bit of this masa to see if we've gotten beaten enough. Looks light and airy, that consistency of like a cake batter, though it'll look a little bit coarser than that. And I'm going to take just a little touch of it here and see if it'll float in the water. You see how it's floating right there to the top? That means I've beaten enough air into it so that our tamales will be light and fluffy. Now on to the fillings. I thought I'd start with the pork filling, pork in red chili. I've bought this cut up pork, like the kind of pork that you would use for pork stew, or you could get something cut from this shoulder. And then I'm going to simmer it in a mixture of chili powder and water. I'm going to start with a measured amount of 3 cups of water. And to that, I'm going to add 1/3 cup of chili powder. Now, this chili powder is without salt, and it's just really full of fresh ground chili flavor. So I'm adding 1/3 cup of it there. I need to add about 1 teaspoon of salt, and then whisk that together before I add the pork to it, just to make sure that all the little lumps are out of the chili powder. I'm going to put the pork in there and then turn the fire on. Now when that pork is fall apart tender, you may need to use a fork to break it into smaller pieces. Then mix together some of that corn masa, the same stuff that we use to make the tamales, with a little bit of water. Then strain it into the mixture, whisking it until it comes back to a boil. That'll thicken up those beautiful juices that you've created there. Now for the second filling, which is chicken in green chili. And for that, I just thought we'd do something really super simple. So I'm going to start with a bottle of tomatillo green chili salsa and some rotisserie chicken that's already coarsely shredded. thicken the tomatillo green chili salsa in exactly the same way, bringing it to a simmer, then mixing some masa with water, straining it into the simmering salsa, and whisking until it thickens up. Take it off the fire, mix in the coarsely shredded chicken, and let the whole thing cool down. Now, time to soak, rehydrate the corn husks. I'm going to put them under running water. This is hot running water. And then when that's completely full, I'm going to grab a plate here to turn upside down on them, keeping them submerged so that they'll rehydrate evenly. Now on to the steamers. Of course, we've got our great big steamer here, but you could feed a whole village with this quantity of tamales. Well, you could go to your Mexican grocery store and get the little mini version of that. This will hold 15 tamales or so, and it's set up in exactly the same way as the large one, with a plate that's suspended about 3/4 of the way down over the simmering water. You put your tamales in there, put the top on it, and steam it. You could set up pretty much that same sort of thing with one of these flexible steamer inserts. Just find a tall pot, put this in there. You're going to have your simmering water underneath and your tamales on the top. Or you could go to an Asian market and get one of these. Problem with the Asian steamers is that they're not very tall. So they work perfectly good for banana leaf wrap tamales, but the corn husk tamales that need to stand up are a bit of a challenge in this one. But I thought perfect for our party tonight would be to use a clam steamer. Now this guy is set up in such a way that you can put your simmering water underneath, and you put your tamales right in here. This will hold at least 3 or 4 dozen tamales, perfect for the crowd that we've got coming today. Wow. Now on to one of my favorite tamales. Fresh corn tamales. This is something I love to do when the corn is in season. But of course, the corn in Mexico is a little different than the corn in the United States. Here we have sweet corn. In Mexico, they have field corn or grain corn, but they pick it when it's at the milk stage, at that tender stage. And then they would roast it as roasting ears, or maybe cut it off the cob and make these fabulous sweet corn tamales. Now, we can achieve almost exactly that same fabulous taste and texture that you get in Mexico by combining our sweet corn with some of that fresh corn masa, the stuff that we used in the tamal dough that we just finished. Now, to start this out, I'm going to grab a couple of bowls here, take 2 ears of corn, and I'm going to cut the husks off of it. I think that'd be about the right place. I want to save these husks because I want to be able to use them for wrapping our tamales. So I'm going to sort of peel these guys off. I want to do that keeping them pretty much intact as much as I can here. And then we'll use those to wrap the tamales. And then get all of the little silks off of there, clean it up pretty nice. I'm going to save the husks that I will cut off very carefully from the 2 ears in a plastic bag. This will keep them from drying out at all. Put those right over there, clean off the countertop. And now we go to cutting the kernels off the cob. This is my favorite way to do it, simply because it allows me to cut down close to the cob, and as I do, the kernels just fall down into the bowl, but I can keep the cob high enough that I can keep it out of everything that I'm cutting. Okay, with that all off the cob there, I'm going to put the kernels into the food processor and then pulse it till I get a kind of medium coarse puree. Fresh corn in season has such a wonderful aroma. Now I'm going to put in pretty much an equal amount of that coarsely ground corn masa and then pulse that till it's mixed together. And then I've got the last ingredients to go into it. I've got a stick of butter. These have a richer flavor than the other ones because we add that butter to them. And then I'm going to put in about a half a teaspoon of salt, about a teaspoon and a half of baking powder to give these a nice little puffiness, about like that, and then some sugar. Now in Mexico, using that milk stage field corn, we'd probably put about 1/4 of a cup. Here I'm going to put about 2 tablespoons in because our sweet corn, of course, is sweeter. Now I'm just going to pulse that until everything comes together into a kind of light and fluffy batter. That's looking really good. Now, for the filling for these fresh corn tamales, I thought we should just keep it very, very simple. I'm going to do roasted poblanos. And when the guests arrive, we're going to cut up fingers of Monterey Jack cheese, put that in the middle. I think it's going to be absolutely delicious. But I'm going to roast a poblano here over high heat until it's blackened and blistered all over. Let it cool down until it's handleable, then rub off the blackened skin. Tear it open and pull out the seed pod. Then rinse it off to get all the stray seeds and bits of skin off of it. Then slice it into thin strips. Then these slices into a little decorative bowl here, and we're one step closer to that tamalada. Okay, so I was thinking that while the tamales are steaming, I wanted to have something to offer to my guests, something substantial and something kind of traditional in its flavor. And that's when I thought about Caldo de Camaron. It's a very traditional shrimp soup that you can find in old-fashioned restaurants in Mexico and some of the cantinas. And then when the tamales are filling the kitchen with their beautiful aroma, well, the guests will have something to eat. Now, that flavor that you get in a traditional Caldo de Camaron, it comes from 2 things. It comes from the long black pasilla chile, and it comes from dried shrimp. Now, I know some of you are going to say, where in the world would I ever find dried shrimp? Well, you can get it at Mexican grocery stores and a lot of Asian grocery stores as well. And then there's going to be another group of you that's going to say, I'm not sure about dried shrimp. You know, because their flavor, what they add to the soup is, well, it's a little stronger shrimp flavor than a lot of us are used to. Well, those of you that fall into that camp, well, you could just leave it out and you'll make an absolutely delicious soup. Well, let me show you how you get started. I'm going to put a kind of medium fire under the big pot, film it with a little olive oil. And I'm going to peel 6 cloves of this garlic, and then clean 4 of these long black pasilla chilies. You can clean those by tearing off the stem end and then tearing them open, cleaning out all the seeds. Now scoop the garlic and the dried pasilla chilies into the pot. And I'm going to tear these pasillas up so that they'll toast nicely. It'll take about 3 minutes or so for these all to toast until you notice that the chilies are all changed in color, and then fill the kitchen with the aroma. Now I'm going to put in a quart of chicken broth. And for those of you that want to take that adventurous route, I'm going to drop in a few of those dried shrimp here, about 1 ounce. And then I'm going to let this simmer for about 30 minutes here while I chop up these potatoes and carrots. Simmering soup off and ladle all of the soup, including all of the solids, into the blender. And then all of that will go onto the blender, and we're going to blend it to a smooth puree. Now, One thing that I did before I turned the blender jar on was to pull this center part of the top out, because when you're blending hot mixtures, they'll build up pressure in there and you've got to give an escape valve for that. Now I'm going to strain this mixture into the pot again, pour it through a kind of medium mesh strainer here, and then put heat back underneath it. Again, about a medium heat. There we go. Now I'm going to press this mixture through this medium mesh strainer. Okay. The second half of the broth, chicken broth, will go into the soup. This is beautiful smelling, especially if you like the traditional flavors of Central Mexico. And then I'm going to add potatoes and carrots chopped up to it. And one last flavoring, epazote. Now this is a very traditional herb from the central part of Mexico, one of the pungent herbs. Really fabulous in its flavor once you get used to it. And I'm going to throw a couple of sprigs of it in there. We're going to let this simmer for about 30 minutes. And all we have left is to season the soup, and then right before the guests arrive, I'm going to put some fresh shrimp in there, making this a special occasion version of it. And then ladle that into some mugs and serve it with some fresh lime to squeeze on. You've got something to drink along the way. The pork, and you just take a little spoonful and just put it in a line right down the middle. But not too much. That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. You do the same thing. Now right down the middle. There you go. And then just roll it around. You want to add the pork. Okay, so we're going to switch off. You get to do that with the chicken this time. Okay. So I'm going to ask you just to scoop up a little bit. They're much smaller than the other ones. I'm going to give you that one to start with here. So I'm going to put a couple of them together here. Press that out. And then these are going to get simply filled with a little bit of roasted pepper down the middle, a piece of cheese in the middle of it like that. Here is the steamer. Okay, in the space where there is nothing there, we're going to start setting those in there a little bit. This is a shrimp soup. It's very popular in central Mexico. So what I'm going to do is to give you a little lime on the side of it, if you'd like to have that. It's actually one of the things that a lot of people will find in Mexico. Okay, let's just see how these guys came out. I can tell by the smell it's going to be wonderful. That was a lot to see, wasn't it? Okay, so there's the first one. We got a piece here. How about that? Okay. Here you go, right. See what I'm saying? I mean, tamales have got it all going on. Pretty neat little package deal. Everybody happy over here?